Statistics can tell you anything you want them to tell you. So always be careful when somebody goes on TV and says, well, here's the reason why this is the case, because look at these statistics. And they put a graph up there and it looks like, oh my gosh, look how bad that is. But you can manipulate statistics, not by changing the data, but just by talking about the things you want to talk about and ignoring the rest. So let me just throw out one of the things that's often talked about when it comes to immigration today is that there are way more people coming in from other countries today. And that is absolutely true. If you look at this, look here. In 2015, from let's say roughly, trying to think what this was, but roughly in this time period from 2010 to 2015, about 43 million right here. 43 million people were immigrated into America. That's a lot of people. And if you go over here to this, man, how many decades do we have to do before you add up to 43 million? That might be all of the 1800s right there, or maybe even more. So you say, oh my gosh, look how many more people are coming in. It's just so many immigrants, blah, blah, blah. We need to control the number of immigrants. Fantastic. That is one argument that's sitting over here. And if you just look at those stats, okay, let's talk about that. However, we have to remember that there's way more people in the United States today than there was back in 1850. So we have this other piece of data that we want to know, and that's what percentage of the population was foreign born, was an immigrant. And now that's a little bit different, because what we see is even though this is super low, we also know that there weren't a lot of people in the United States, and there were a lot of people that were foreign born. And so if we start going that direction, foreign born, okay, it was pretty high. It's like 15% of the population. All the way through, till like 1930, when again those quotas sort of kick in and it kind of dips back down. Now it's come back up to sort of these original as percentage of the population. Yeah, it's roughly in that 14% of the population, but that's nowhere near what a majority was in the United States back in that time. So if you look at this from different sort of pieces of data, you have very different sort of takes on how immigration is, how it affects sort of the amount of people in the United States, how it affects the culture of the United States, all that kind of stuff. So let's talk about wave 3. I didn't. Okay, wave 3 is 1970 to the present. So who do you think is the people who are largely feeding the immigration of the United States from 1970 to the present? The answer is probably not that difficult. It's mostly Asia and Latin America. In 1990, Mexico became the largest source of immigration. That might surprise you because we've always been bordering Mexico. Like, why all of a sudden in 1990? And part of the reason is because of the controls that have been put on so many other countries, and because of that rule in the 1980s that increased the number of people that can come from the Western Hemisphere. The fastest growing group, they're going to be from Asia. I know Asia is not a country, but immigrant groups from Asia tend to be the fastest growing. Now, again, in terms of sheer numbers, Mexico has the most in terms of sheer numbers. But in terms of numbers relative to the ones that are here, populations like China, Japan, Philippines, Vietnam, things like that, they're the fastest growing groups. Now, why? Now, let's just think about this again from our perspective of push and pull. Are these immigrants push or pull immigrants? Because we already know that if they're push, they're probably going to be received a little bit less happily by the people already here. And if they're pull, they'll probably be welcomed. Come, join the American population. This group, the mostly Asia and Latin America, is largely caused by the dislocating effects of globalization. Globalization, again, it changes how the global economy works. It affects wages all over the world, things like that. And what you're going to get is you're going to get a lot of people coming to the United States for pull reasons. But honestly, a lot of that is going to be this push. So, for example, when we think about Mexican immigrants, there are a lot of different reasons why someone would come from Mexico and immigrate into the United States. Tons of reasons. If you ask each individual person, you're going to get a whole range of different things. But what's the stereotype? And that's going to be the thing that's going to really impact how the American population is going to see the new immigrants, the stereotype is going to be somebody who's coming looking for work because wages in Mexico are so low. And that is a very much a push situation. And that is why Mexican immigration tends to have a large group in the... This is another thing that's a super weird thing about America. And honestly, again, every other country. But when we have conversations about immigration, that is we're actually covering over a lot of what we mean by that. Usually when you see debates on TV about immigration, what they're talking about is a very specific kind of immigration. If let's say there's a doctor from Nigeria that wants to come to the United States, Donald Trump will write the visa personally. Come, we want doctors, we want scientists, we want people who are going to add to the economy. But then when you talk about someone who's coming because they want work, they want to build a wall. And that's going to be, again, part of this whole conversation there. There is definitely a racial element to it. It's not a perfect thing where essentially we say no to all Mexican immigrants. That's not the case at all. In fact, it actually sort of, I'm trying to think of the best word on this. It's not racist in that sense, but it is racist in the sense that race plays a role in the choices that are made about that and the stereotypes that are applied to the groups that are coming in. So, all right, so we're going to leave that behind for just a second. We're going to talk one more thing about immigration, and that is there are really, again, there's tons of different immigration policies because now we're going to bring the politics in this whole thing. But there's actually two sort of broad sets of policies that go into it. One is what we call assimilation. And this has sort of been the U.S. version of our immigration policies. And here you give up old loyalties for new ones. So, for example, let's say that I come here from Nigeria. I might call myself a Nigerian American or an African American. So you have that hyphenation there. It makes it feel like, yeah, I am this thing. But really, but from the point of view of the United States, that's great as an ethnic category. But when it comes to loyalty, citizenship, this is the only one that matters. So, for example, if you come and you bring your kids, don't expect there to be a school set aside that has the language for them. There's an expectation that you have to learn English language. You have to assimilate into the culture. What is the American culture that dominates? Man, I don't really want to go into this right now. This is super weird to talk about this stuff, like monologue like this. But I'll just give you an example here. So I don't know if you remember this. I'm not going to go into that. Never mind. I'm just going to move on. Too messy. The second set of policies is what we call multiculturalism. Now, I know you're taught in schools that we are multicultural. That is not exactly the case. Canada is much more along those lines. You celebrate the old loyalties, but the new one triumphs. You give the old loyalties for the new one. So in Canada, there actually is, for example, if you live in Quebec, that there are schools that speak French, teach French, that in Canada, anytime you do a government statement, you have to do it in English and you have to do it in French because it's protecting that sort of Frenchness of that area. If we go to Europe, this is largely the France version and this is largely the UK version. One of the problems that's created by this is, does it create unity? Is it inefficient? Yes, it's absolutely inefficient. It's harder to create unity. It's one of the reasons the U.S. goes with this model because they want the unity, they want the efficiency, but you give up other things. Like, for example, someone feels assimilated, which is never a good word. It feels very sort of Star Trek, the Borg, all that kind of stuff. It's kind of creepy. All right. I did a horrible job talking about this. This is one that we could have a great discussion about if we were together. It doesn't work so well like this. So it's something I do encourage you to think about. What are the positives and the negatives of each of those things? How does that affect what it means to be American? That sort of thing. All right. What I'm going to have you do now is I'm going to have you read a couple things on how the coronavirus pandemic, it affects everything. So how is it affecting how we talk about immigration? Is that a good thing, bad thing? And I just want you to think about that. I'm not going to have you guys do an assignment on this. You probably have enough things to do right now. But I do want you to think about it, since we're in the midst of this. And then we're gonna move on and start talking about some internal migrations. So it's gonna be a little jarring that in a video that comes after it. But the question that I want you to think about when you watch that video is, why did people in the U.S. move to the suburbs? That's it. I'll see you guys in a second.